Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's workshop on the U.S. Tax Court. We're excited to have you all here with us. My name is Masood Chotani, and I'm the director of the Taxpayers Help Center, where we are dedicated to assisting low-income taxpayers with their tax concerns. Our clinic's mission is to represent, educate, and advocate for taxpayers both locally here in Northridge and beyond. So we know your time is valuable, and we deeply appreciate you choosing to spend part of your Saturday with us. Today, we aim to provide you with valuable insights into the U.S. tax court and the litigation options taxpayers have in dealing with the IRS. I also want to extend a special thank you to my co-host, Zach Golan, who is joining us despite his busy schedule. Zach has a lot on his plate today, including soccer matches and other commitments, I'm sure, Zach. So we're especially grateful that he's made time to be here. And above it all, he's the one who prepared these slides. Thank you so much, Zach. So let's dive into today's discussion, and I'll have you discuss our organization.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for being here with me today. So the Taxpayers Help Center is a nonprofit 501c3 organization in Northridge, California. We operate 2 tax clinics, first of which is our low-income taxpayer clinic. We help taxpayers resolve their tax disputes with the IRS. And the second of which is our volunteer income tax assistance clinic. And there we help prepare income taxes for free. We are an IRS authorized certifying acceptance agent for individual taxpayer identification number applications. And if you'd like to connect with us, you may do so by email at info@taxpayershelpcenter.com. You can also reach us at our Facebook account, which is Taxpayers Help Center, Inc., a nonprofit organization. And then we have our location at 9029 Reseda Boulevard, Suite 209, Northridge, California. And then our website, taxpayershelpcenter.com, and then our number 818-366-0111 are also listed over here. Also, if you type in Taxpayers Help Center on Google, you can find all of this information. And then if you have any questions at any time during the presentation, you can email us at info@taxpayershelpcenter.com, and a tax professional will get back to you. So the Taxpayers Help Center helps taxpayers both locally and beyond. Since the services we provide are free, donations are important in supporting us and in helping the reach of our services. Any monetary donations are greatly appreciated, and additionally, those who can volunteer their time or expertise or spread awareness are a great help. And so if you would like to make a monetary donation, you may do so at taxpayershelpcenter.com/make-a-donation. Or you can just go to the taxpayershelpcenter.com, or rather taxpayershelpcenter.com, and click on the Make a Donation tab, which I've highlighted here in red. All right, so.
Okay, great.
Mr.
Let's
Chotani.
begin. Yeah, thank you so much, Zach. So the title of today's workshop is Navigating the U.S. Tax Court, a Pathway to Justice for Taxpayers. And in today's presentation, the participants are going to learn about taxpayer forums for IRS disputes and explore taxpayer litigation options with the Internal Revenue Service. A lot of taxpayers don't even think about that because, they've gone through the audit process, et cetera. They never went a step beyond. That's why we wanted to do this presentation today, to discuss this final kind of option to take your dispute to the U.S. tax court. So we are going to discuss why the U.S. tax court might be the best option for taxpayers, uncover the U.S. tax court's evolution, understand challenging the IRS's decisions in the U.S. tax court, and prepare and navigate the tax court process. So Zach, before you actually get into the first topic, I wanted to share a few things, really important things with the audience, because they need to understand actually this whole definition or meaning of what is jurisdiction, which is really crucial. Okay, so I actually printed this, which I'm just going to read actually from one of my legal resources. So jurisdiction can be defined as, number one, the power of a court to adjudicate cases and issue those orders, which are the final judgments or the conclusion of the case. Or jurisdiction can be defined as the territory within which a court or government agency may properly exercise its power. So I just want to take this a couple of steps beyond. So this can be further broken down into three categories or components. Number one, whether the court that is about to hear this matter has personal jurisdiction. Really, what that means is whether the court may even hear the case involving these specific defendants who've come there to ask for some type of dispute resolution. The second thing, or the second component, is whether there is jurisdiction over the subject matter. Okay, so does the court even, can they even consider the subject matter that's being brought forth? And the last component is whether the jurisdiction to render the particular judgment lies with this court or not. So one of the key things to remember is this: any court possesses jurisdiction over matters only to the extent granted to it by the Constitution. And that is the case with the U.S. Tax Court. The U.S. Tax Court is a court of limited jurisdiction. It doesn't hear all the cases or every type of taxpayer case. Okay, so that's one key thing that one must remember. And I think you're going to discuss more about the tax court not having jury trials. It's just like a judge, basically. So there is no jury in the U.S. Tax Court. And also, one important thing to understand is that the U.S. Tax Court does not have jurisdiction and does not hear criminal tax matters. The criminal tax matters, basically, the U.S. district courts have jurisdiction over it. And one last thing before you begin the first topic is quickly to share this with the participants, that the tax court is composed of 19 judges. So there are 19 judges on the tax court appointed by the President of the United States. And there's a whole confirmation process by the Senate. The former judges whose terms have ended, so they have a 15-year term. So when that term expires, they usually come back as senior judges. Okay, so they are recalled. So right now, they have these regular trial judges. Then you have these other judges who were recalled. And then you have special trial judges. So basically, presently, the chief of the regular the judges is Judge Kathleen Kerrigan. She's the chief judge of the U.S. Tax Court, and one of the senior judges, Judge Carluzzo, he's actually the special trial judge. And one other thing, which I think you'll bring up when you bring the picture of the U.S. Tax Court, that the U.S. Tax Court is very unique. It's, first of all, it's located in Washington, D.C., and taxpayers might think, hey, I live in like Los Angeles, or like, I'm in like Seattle, Washington. I'm not going to go to Washington, D.C. Nothing to worry about. It's a unique court. The judges come to your town. I mean, can you believe this, Zach?
That's really cool.
Yeah, the judges travel to you and they hear the cases. Usually the larger cities, actually, they have more, of these visits. Some smaller cases, some smaller cities, basically, they don't have this. So basically, like Los Angeles, is very large, or New York, Chicago, perhaps. So the frequency is a little bit more. Okay, so I think I've said enough. And without further ado, please begin the first topic.
All right, thank you for that. So first, we're going to answer the question, what is the U.S. Tax Court and why was it established? So the U.S. Tax Court is a specialized judicial body created to offer taxpayers a platform to contest tax deficiencies determined by the IRS before any payment is required. It was established by the Congress in 1924 as the Board of Tax Appeals, and it was named the U.S. Tax Court in 1942. The court's main function is to resolve disputes between the taxpayers and the IRS, providing an independent venue for challenging IRS decisions. Also, the tax court is located at 400 2nd Street in Washington, D.C., as you mentioned. But yeah, I mean, they come to you, so you don't have to worry about traveling there.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm sure the taxpayers did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah, that is pretty cool. All right.
Yeah, so let's continue on with the history and the evolution of the U.S. Tax Court. So on this slide, the history of the U.S. Tax Court. So the U.S. Tax Court has a storied history that began, like you said, in 1924, when it was first established as the Board of Tax Appeals, BTA. Its creation marked a significant change in the way taxpayers could challenge IRS assessments. So the word assessment means when the IRS officially records in their books, their ledgers, a liability that is owed by the taxpayer. That's what it means, assessing the tax. So challenge IRS assessments as it provided a venue where disputes could be heard without the burden of paying the contested tax upfront. So this actually is the beauty of the U.S. Tax Court. You don't, you don't have to pay that upfront. Unlike, you'll discuss that, I think, at a later slide, that the U.S. District Court or the U.S. Court of Federal, the claims, the taxpayers actually have to pay the money that they owe the IRS first, and then sue the IRS to get a refund. Here, the U.S. Tax Court is probably a unique, venue. There is no payment required, and you can challenge the IRS and dispute those deficiencies. And then, if you're successful, that's the end of the story. Okay, so before the BTA, taxpayers were required to pay the tax first. Okay, so prior to 1924, they had to pay the money and then sue for a refund, which was often financially overwhelming. I mean, can you imagine, in the U.S. tax code, I've read cases where, the dollar amounts are in the millions of dollars. So a taxpayer, has to pay all that. And then there's also doubt that, what happens if they're not successful? They're not going to get their money back. But in the U.S. tax court, even if you owe them millions of dollars, you can go in and then you can actually sue the IRS. So in 1942, the BTA underwent a transformation, being reorganized and renamed the U.S. Tax Court. This change signified its evolution from an administrative board to a more formal judicial body, becoming an Article I court under the U.S. Constitution. As an Article I court, it was established by Congress with specialized jurisdiction solely focused on tax matters. This is really important. As you'll discuss later, the judges in the U.S. Tax Court are basically extremely experienced. They have the background and education in tax matters. It's a specialized body of knowledge, giving it a unique role in the federal judicial system. Throughout the years, the U.S. Tax Court has continuously evolved to meet the growing complexities of tax law and the increasing volume of disputes between taxpayers and the IRS. Over 25,000 cases are filed every year. Can you imagine that in the U.S. Tax Court? So one of the key developments in its history was the introduction of the small case division. And you'll discuss that on one of the later slides. This is very important for small taxpayers. What is the small case division of the U.S. Tax Court, which provided more streamlined procedures for handling disputes involving smaller amounts, that being $50,000 or less. Okay, so if the case is over $50,000, it becomes a regular case. If it's $50,000 or less, it's classified as a smaller case, but the taxpayers still have an option of whether they want to still proceed as a regular case or a small case. We'll discuss the pros and cons of each. Okay, so throughout the years, the U.S. tax court has evolved to meet the complexities of tax law and the increased volume of disputes, as we discussed, and the small case division that I mentioned. So today, the U.S. tax court stands as a vital institution of the American legal system, offering a fair and specialized forum for taxpayers seeking resolution of the tax disputes. So let's move on to the next slide, Zach.
Sure. Okay, so now we're going to answer the question, why consider U.S. tax court? So when facing a tax dispute with the IRS, the U.S. tax court provides several key advantages that taxpayers should consider. First, unlike other courts, you are not required to pay the disputed tax amount before your case is heard, as Mr. Chotani talked about previously. So this can be a major relief, especially if you're unable to afford the payment up front. And the judges in the U.S. tax court are also experts in tax law, which means they have a deep understanding of the complexities that may be involved in your case. This specialized expertise gives you a better chance of having your arguments understood and fairly adjudicated. Additionally, the tax court is designed to be more accessible and less formal than other courts. This is particularly beneficial for taxpayers who may find the legal process intimidating, as the small cases division even allows you to represent yourself without needing a lawyer. And finally, the U.S. tax court has a history of providing balanced, fair outcomes, and its decisions often set important precedents that can influence future IRS practices.
So let me add a few things here. So first, in the last or the second to last paragraph that you talked about, you said that the small cases division even allows you to represent yourself without needing a lawyer. So another beauty of the tax court, and it's in other courts too, but here, pro se means self-represented taxpayers. Over 90% of the petitioners in the U.S. tax court are pro se. Okay, so I mean, some of them, they can't even afford lawyers. So this is where basically a lot of these pro bono tax clinics, especially, for example, the American Bar Association really helps out, and they have a whole panel actually of pro bono lawyers. So like I said, over 90% of the petitioners in the U.S. tax court are pro se. All they have to do is pay $60 to file the petition in the U.S. tax court, and you are self-representing yourself. I mean, sometimes it ends in a disaster.
Right. I
Because
imagine it could be, if you have a complicated case, it could be hard to represent yourself, but
exactly.
it
So
is nice that you have the option to do so.
exactly. So, but then a lot of times what happens is that there's something called a calendar call. The calendar call is where, you know, the case is called for trial and a date is set, etc. At these calendar calls, for example, the low-income taxpayer clinics like ours, you know, they go to the calendar calls. And when you see a pro se taxpayer, for example, we can actually offer assistance. So all these clinics nationwide, all these pro bono lawyers, American Bar Association is assisting, you know, a lot of these through them. I mean, they're assisting a lot of these pro se taxpayers. So I guess one of the key things is that if you are a pro se taxpayer and you can't afford to hire a lawyer and you don't understand the tax code, you know, you could have an issue as to how you present the evidence, how you present your case. You can always call a clinic like ours, a low-income taxpayer clinic. So, and a lot of the clinics are on the, the tax court has a stuffer program. The stuffer is like a pamphlet of all the clinics in your area. So our clinic is on there also. There are a bunch of clinics in Los Angeles. They're on the stuffer program. And then another thing I wanted to mention was you mentioned that the tax court has a history of providing balanced and fair outcomes. Extremely crucial to understand. Most cases are heard de novo. De nuevo, for example, in Spanish, like brand new. De novo Latin means brand new. They start all over again. So the judge is independent. They don't consider, you know, what happened before. De novo is they're going to look at it from a fresh perspective. So possibly in a prior appeals or an audit, you know, the IRS representative was not fair, let's say perhaps, did not look at everything, the court is going to ignore all that. They're going to look at everything brand new. That's the key thing. So let's move on to the
Yeah.
next slide. So what are the benefits of U.S. tax court? And I mentioned some of them and you did also. So one of the significant advantages is the opportunity it gives you to present your evidence in front of an impartial judge. And the evidential, the way you do that is actually very simple in a small case process. It's very informal, because the federal rules of evidence are being used. So especially in regular cases, one must be familiar with the federal rules of evidence, how to present evidence, what can be introduced, what cannot be introduced, etc. In a small case, the judge basically offers these lax rules, and it's a pretty informal process, exchanging information. So the evidence in front of an impartial judge, if your dispute hinges on specific facts or a particular interpretation of tax law, having this chance can be crucial. De novo, brand new, looking at it from a fresh perspective is really crucial. The judges are not just experts, they strive to balance the IRS's position with the taxpayer's unique circumstances, which can lead to a more favorable outcome. So for simpler disputes, like I said, the small case division offers a streamlined process, etc. Moreover, while the decisions in the U.S. tax court are binding only on the parties involved, they often serve as important precedents that can impact how the IRS handles similar issues in the future. And this makes your case part of a broader context in shaping tax laws. Okay, so next slide, Zach, can you please continue?
Great. Okay, so next we're going to be answering what are the forms for taxpayer litigation against the IRS? So taxpayers have several options for litigating against the IRS, including the U.S. Tax Court, U.S. District Court, U.S. Court of Federal Claims, and the IRS appeals process. So each form has distinct characteristics and procedures, which can influence your choice of where to litigate. And we'll get into more detail in momentarily.
Okay, great. So let me go on to the next slide. So how does the U.S. tax court compare to these other forums that the taxpayers have, the U.S. district courts, the Court of Federal Claims, etc.? Again, I think we discussed it before. The U.S. tax court allows taxpayers to dispute their liabilities without paying the disputed amount up front. This is really crucial. Like, especially in our clinic, we deal with low-income taxpayers in our clinics. They
Right.
they can't even afford to pay $2,000, or forget about $2,000. $500 is difficult for them. So they actually just pay the $60. We help them go to the tax court, and then, we represent them. So this offers both. So the court is specifically focused on tax issues, and the judges are experts in tax law. It offers both regular and small tax procedures, the latter, which is the small tax case, being more informal, like I said earlier, and with final decisions that cannot be appealed. So here's actually something when we talk about the pros and cons. The small tax cases, if the taxpayer loses, cannot be appealed. So they have no precedence, basically. Only the regular tax cases can be appealed. Okay, so that's one of the key things. So let's move on, Zach.
Yeah, so what about the U.S. District Court? So the U.S. District Court requires taxpayers to pay the disputed tax before filing a lawsuit. And so this is, it's super, nice if you're, going to the U.S. Tax Court and you don't have to pay the taxes beforehand, as we mentioned. However, with the U.S. District Court, you do need to pay the disputed tax before filing the lawsuit. And so, unlike the U.S. Tax Court, it offers the option for a jury trial. However, it handles a wide range of cases beyond tax disputes, so the judge or jury may not have the same level of tax expertise.
Yeah, so this is a key point here is that the U.S. Tax Court does not have an option for a jury trial. Okay, but the U.S. District Courts have this option.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So how does the U.S. Court of Federal Claims differ? This, again, the Court of Federal Claims is in Washington, D.C. also, like the U.S. Tax Court. In the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, again, the taxpayers must pay the disputed tax before filing a lawsuit. This court does not offer jury trials, and basically the focus is on monetary claims against the federal government, including tax refund suits. So this Court of Federal Claims has nationwide jurisdiction, and basically this is suited for like larger or more complex cases. I guess the bottom line is that, especially like for our clinic, that you are part of our clinic also, Zach. You see a lot of the low income taxpayers. Our clinics are well suited for these low income taxpayers, and the U.S. tax code is basically the best venue for them to go into. Just pay the $60, and there's no payment required. Before you engage in a dispute with the IRS.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a nice way to do it. Okay, so what is the IRS appeals process? So the IRS appeals process is an internal procedure that resolves disputes directly with the IRS without involving the court system. So after a decision, except in small tax cases in the U.S. tax court, taxpayers can appeal to the appropriate U.S. Court of Appeals, focusing on legal errors rather than factual disputes.
Okay, excellent. So this is very important. Basically, there's something also called like forum shopping. I'll discuss that in a minute. So basically, for example, you are going to file an appeal in basically where you are living or where you're located. Okay, so for example, if you filed your petition and you are a resident of Los Angeles, you are going to be in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Okay, so you cannot go into the Seventh Circuit, for example. So you basically have to file a petition and select a venue or a city where you are going to actually have the trial. And that is basically, that decides where the appeal is going to be filed. So like I said, California is the Ninth Circuit. So the cases that have precedence in the Ninth Circuit will be looked at by the U.S. Tax Court. So forum shopping basically means that before you file the petition, you may read some prior cases, for example, that might be more favorable to your specific situation, and maybe you I don't know, you maybe move to another city or somewhere, where you actually that you said, okay, so this circuit maybe has a case like mine, similar type of situations, and this circuit actually, was very favorable to my situation. So I think maybe that should be the place where I should actually file the petition as the place for trial. So these are things, like, I mean, this is a very basic session, but if we see like, the taxpayers want us to have more focused workshops, we can have specifically designed workshops on these other areas also.
Yeah, and it's also good just to spread awareness because I mean I myself didn't know about the IRS tax court, so I mean I'm
Sure,
sure.
yeah, this is that's exactly why we actually had this workshop, Zach, because I mean we know that the taxpayers know about the IRS audits. A lot of them have been audited. They also know that they can appeal the audit findings, etc. But a lot of them, they don't know how the U.S. tax court works, and this actually is like the final destination, where you can actually resolve this dispute. And then obviously you have the various forums, like like you said, the U.S. tax court, the district courts, the Court of Federal Claims. But the U.S. tax court, again, is probably the best place for low-income taxpayers.
Yeah.
You want to do this one?
Yeah, I can go into this one. So now we're going to talk about the comparison of forums. So when dealing with tax disputes, the U.S. tax court is often the most accessible and specialized forum, especially for those who want to challenge their tax liability without paying it upfront. It's tailored specifically to tax issues, making it a preferred choice for many taxpayers. On the other hand, U.S. district courts offer the possibility of a jury trial. This could be beneficial in cases where a taxpayer believes that a jury might be more sympathetic to their situation, or when a jury trial might add value to the case. For larger refund claims or cases involving significant amounts of money, the U.S. Court of Federal Claims is typically used. This court is suited for more complex disputes and formal procedures, making it appropriate when the amount at stake justifies the complexity of the process. So choosing the right forum depends on the specifics of the taxpayer's case. Factors to consider rather include the nature of the dispute, the amount involved, and whether the taxpayer can afford to pay the disputed tax before litigation begins. Each forum has its own advantages, and it is suited to different types of tax disputes.
You want to do the other one also? It's a short slide.
Yeah, sure. So what types of cases do the U.S. tax court handle? So the U.S. tax court handles various tax-related disputes between taxpayers and the IRS. So deficiency cases, refund cases, collection due process, CDP cases, and innocent spouse relief.
So let me quickly, first of all, elaborate on what is a deficiency case, because a lot of taxpayers, they don't know what that means.
Mhm.
So the deficiency means this: when you file your income taxes, you, for example, have shown a tax liability of $5,000, for example.
Mhm.
And then after you file your income taxes, let's say that the IRS made some adjustments, whether the adjustments were made because it was a mathematical error or it was an adjustment made after you were actually went through an examination or an audit. So let's say that the IRS came up with $8,000 as what you actually owe them instead of the $5,000 that you showed on the tax return. The difference between what they came up with, the $8,000, what you showed, the $5,000, the $3,000 is the deficiency.
Mhm.
Basically, your tax return was deficient by $3,000. That's what it means.
And so if you didn't go to the U.S. tax court and one of them where you need to pay up front, does that mean you would need to pay those $3,000 before you go to the court?
That is correct. So you act, excellent point, Zach. So if you, I mean, I don't know why you would do that, um,
Right.
but let's say that you decide to take that route. Let's say you paid the 3,000, you had like extra surplus money laying around somewhere. You said, hey, you know what? Let me just pay these guys. I
Yeah.
like the district court. I want a jury trial. And also, I don't want my judges to be experts on, in tax law. Sometimes that can be good, you know.
Mhm.
There are pros and cons. I mean, the judges in the U.S. District Court are not dealing with these matters. They're not like JD LLMs, or they have like an extensive background working in law firms, like specializing in tax matters. So that may be a good thing sometimes. Like something might slip through.
Yeah.
It, so that's what I wanted to point out.
Yeah. Thank you. So, oh, and so if we want to go, just to repeat, the most common cases in the U.S. tax court are deficiency cases where taxpayers dispute additional taxes the IRS says they owe, as Mr. Chitani mentioned, and taxpayers can challenge these determinations without having to pay the disputed amount first.
Mm-hmm.
So now refunds cases.
Yeah. So what about refund cases? So refund cases where taxpayers seek to recover overpaid taxes are less common in the U.S. tax court. Those refund cases are usually resolved in the U.S. District Court or the Court of Federal Claims, because this is where the tax has been paid.
Right.
Now you're kind of like asking them to give it back to you.
And then what are collection due process cases? So
Okay, excellent. That's a very good point. Yeah. So why don't you read this and then I'll elaborate on this also. So,
sure. Yeah, so CDP cases involve challenges to IRS collection actions such as liens and levies. And the tax court assesses whether the IRS's actions were appropriate and whether any relief is warranted.
so a lot of times, Zach, the taxpayers think that the IRS, because maybe they've read some stories, I don't know, like 40 years old or something, where uh, someone's house was like, like repossessed or like foreclosed on.
Mhm.
The IRS took this guy's vehicle. No, I think you did the workshop on taxpayers' bill of rights.
Yeah.
So over the years, the taxpayers have extensive rights in their dealings with the IRS.
Mhm.
So you talked about liens and levies.
Right.
Okay, so a lien is basically, so let me just basically say this. In fact, I had a taxpayer yesterday. I was trying to explain it to them. They didn't understand. When you owe money to the IRS, let's say it's in collections, etc., the IRS automatically has a hypothetical lien. It's like an invisible lien on all your current and future assets that you have. So this is like an invisible lien. Then the next step is a collections due process hearing, and this comes under IRS Code Sections 6320 and 6330. The IRS will give you a chance to come forth and discuss this with an appeals, officer. It's called the collections due process. They're giving you their due process rights for a hearing before they actually place this lien. So you had the invisible lien. Now the IRS wants to perfect their lien. Perfecting the lien means they are going to go into the county where you reside, the county recorder's office, and they will actually record a lien in that county. So, for example, if you try to sell your home, if you own an asset, they will be in line to get those proceeds from the sale. Okay, so a lien basically is that. A levy is actually when they exercise their right, for example, to hit your bank account and take the money out. That's a levy.
Mhm.
But you have a right to a hearing, which is the collection due process hearing. At that hearing, you can discuss various options with the appeals officer, because usually these collections due process hearings are held at the IRS Independent Appeals Office, which is actually a totally independent office.
Mhm.
And they listen to you, unbiased. They listen to you, and you want to let them know, why you feel that lien should not be recorded. So usually, let me tell you this: um, if you owe $10,000 or more to the IRS, they can record a lien.
Got it. So yeah. Okay. So now we'll talk about what is innocent spouse relief. So the tax court also handles cases where one spouse seeks relief from joint tax liability due to actions taken by the other spouse under the innocent spouse relief provisions.
Yeah, so I think Amil did a workshop on this. And if the participants or audience want to go back onto our Facebook page, they'll see one of the workshops on innocent spouse relief. So let me
Mhm.
give you an example.
Sure.
Let's say that, you know, you're married to someone and you are basically, let's say, not working at all. You don't have a business.
Mhm.
It could be the husband or the wife. Let's say the wife actually was the key earner of the household, and the husband basically was having some difficult situations, finding a job, etc. And so let's say that the wife basically is the one who had this tax liability primarily from her, for example, um, a business, a retail products that she was selling.
Mhm.
The husband basically they file joint taxes. Okay, so what happens is that when you file joint taxes with someone, husband and wife, you are jointly and severally liable for those taxes obligations. Okay, so let's say that now they get a divorce. I'm just saying, for example,
Mhm.
but the IRS is still coming after the husband because they had filed these taxes jointly. So now that husband can seek innocent spouse relief by saying that, you know, the US tax court, please listen to me because this basically does not belong to me. I'm kind of innocent because I had no knowledge of this. You know, my spouse controlled the finances. I mean, the obviously questions are raised. Hey, how come you didn't even look at your taxes? So there
Mhm.
are many cases uh, where the judges are asking them. I mean, how can you be like an innocent bystander when you file those taxes together with your spouse? You didn't even look at those numbers. Like it said
Right.
you owe them like 20,000. But that's another workshop. We'll do that.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
that's what innocent spouse is. One spouse is saying, please let me go. I want to sever myself from this obligation and just put the obligation on the other side and
Right.
just release me from this obligation. So go ahead.
Yeah. So should I do this one as well?
Yes, please.
Okay, so what are partnership proceedings? So partnership proceedings involve disputes over partnership items and are addressed under TURFA and the Bipartisan Budget Act. The tax court manages these specialized cases, or TEFRA rather, and
Yeah,
it's an
so this is a
abbreviation.
little kind of a deeper thing, but quickly in general, there is an option that the partnership can actually take. So in the event, so there's actually in a partnership, there's a responsible person, a tax matters person, who is going to be like the liaison, um, the face of the partnership before the IRS. Okay, so you can have an option. So basically, you can say that the IRS, we make an election that when you audit us, you will only audit us at the partnership level, or you have an option of having been audited at the partners level. Okay, so there's an option out there, but this is a little more,
Yeah.
complicated, uh, and we may do something like that in the future.
Yeah. Okay, so how does the court handle employment status? So the court also hears cases related to the classification of workers as employees or independent contractors, which affects how employment taxes are assessed. And we actually talked about this in it may have been our last, yeah, it was in the tax business workshop. We talked the small
Yeah, I
tax.
think you discussed that in
Yeah,
detail.
yeah. So you can go find it there also on Facebook if you'd like to.
Oh, yeah. So the tax court does handle the employment status disputes. It does not handle, like, for example, payroll tax disputes. Uh, it may handle like trust fund liabilities, etc. But that's another workshop we'll do. But here, basically, I think it's enough to know that the worker classification, whether the worker is an employee or an independent contractor, that classification status can be the US tax court has jurisdiction. Going back to that jurisdiction, the court has jurisdiction over these matters.
Mhm. Okay, so what are declaratory judgment actions? So the tax court can issue declaratory judgments on various tax matters, including the qualification of retirement plans and the status of tax exempt organizations.
Yeah, so this again, we are going to, I mean, this is a little more advanced, but to quickly say that this is just basically trying to say that the court has jurisdiction retirement plans. So if there's a dispute with the IRS on an employer's retirement plan, the court can listen to that dispute and the status of a nonprofit. So, for example, if the nonprofit status has been canceled, the US tax court has jurisdiction to listen to that to see if the IRS followed all the right steps in canceling the status of the nonprofit, because cancellation of a tax exempt status can have dire consequences. So the US tax court has jurisdiction. It's limited, but it does have jurisdiction.
Yeah. Okay. So the court handles disputes arising from the IRS whistleblower program, where individuals provide information about tax law violations in exchange for potential rewards.
Okay, good. So, I mean, I don't know if you could, we should let the taxpayers know that the IRS has a whistleblower program and they can get a reward. So we've had actually, I mean, because, our clinic doesn't deal with these types of cases, but we read these cases on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, for example, let's say in that divorce thing that we just talked about, the innocent spouse thing. Let's say that, one spouse, they're really bitter about that separation and they know about the other spouse's hidden bank account
Mm-hmm.
that they know that was not actually, that income was concealed and was not declared on their income taxes, or the account overseas, in the Bahamas or somewhere. So they come for, there's a special form. You fill that form. Usually, I mean, you can be anonymous, but usually, you can put your name down, and the IRS has a special whistleblower department actually that'll review that to see if there's a need to go to the next step. So if they succeed on those tips that you've provided, for example, they succeed in finding $10 million in an overseas bank account this other spouse had, and they succeed in recovering taxes on those amounts, then a percentage of that can be given as a reward to the whistleblower. It's not a good thing to do, right, Zach?
Yeah, no, it's
This,
not.
I mean, there are a lot of employees that whistleblow on the employers. I mean, I was reading a case about some employee, they came forth with all these. I mean, I guess they took the time to steal documents from the employer.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they were so bitter about it was
Maybe, maybe they're want some revenge for something. I don't know.
so vendetta. It's not good. It's not good for
Yeah,
you. I think
yeah,
you should forgive and forget and move on.
right. So what is abatement of interest? Taxpayers can bring cases before the tax court seeking to have interest on unpaid taxes abated, especially if they believe the interest was assessed due to IRS errors or delays.
So, I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory. Abatement of interest to reduce the interest that the IRS has charged. So I guess the bottom line is that these types of cases can be heard by the U.S. tax court. All all we're trying to accomplish is that we're trying to present to the taxpayers that the tax court has jurisdiction. They have the power, they have the authority to listen to these types of abatement cases.
So, should I do this one or would you like
But
to?
yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so can taxpayers appeal U.S. tax court decisions? So taxpayers can appeal decisions made by the U.S. tax court. The appeals process involves the U.S. Court of Appeals and potentially the U.S. Supreme Court. Appeals primarily focus on legal issues rather than factual findings.
Yeah, so I think I discussed that earlier, that
Yeah,
the appeals basically is made to the circuit where you reside, where you file that petition. So, for example, in Los Angeles, it'll be the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. You'll go to the appeals, the court where you reside.
yeah,
That's basically, and then obviously the ultimate will be the U.S. Supreme Court, but the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't hear, you know,
probably don't get that high
a
off.
lot of these tax court cases. They've made some landmark decisions recently about, for example, international penalties. That was a major case. And there are some other cases also, a collection due process application. Uh, I mean, we won't discuss these things right now, but let me mention a couple of things. So
Sure.
first of all, what is the process for a regular taxpayer to come into what is the ticket that they need to go to the tax court? Okay, so let's say that you this is one way of doing it. So you are actually under audit by the IRS, and then the IRS basically issues what they call is a report or a 30-day letter. And then within those 30 days, you have a right to go to the next step, which is the Independent Office of Appeals. And you exercise that right. You go to the appeals division, you're still not happy with that, and a notice of deficiency is issued, NOD, N-O-D. A notice of deficiency is the ticket for the taxpayer to file the petition in the U.S. tax court. Okay, so the notice of deficiency, I don't think we're discussing it in this workshop, is crucial to file it on a timely basis. So the taxpayers only have 90 days from the date that thing was mailed to them. So, and usually the IRS has the final date on the notice of deficiency. It says the final date to file the petition in the U.S. tax court is this. So you will go by that date. If you miss it by, so it's due midnight of that date. You miss it by 1 day or 1 hour, the court does not have jurisdiction. So here's what's happening right now. The U.S. tax court has an online document filing system now, which is called Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N. Everything is done electronically, or, like everything is uploaded or prepared electronically. The mailing process, like slowly is becoming obsolete. So let me give you an example of a tax court case where the U.S. tax court rejected the petition of a taxpayer. It missed it by, I think 45 seconds. So here's what happened. So the U.S. tax court is in the Eastern time zone. It's in Washington, D.C. So midnight, for example, in Washington, D.C. is like 9 p.m. in California, right?
Right.
So this person was in a different time zone in the U.S. He filed his petition after he received the notice of deficiency, which gave him 90 days to file, and the time expired, let's say midnight of July 31. He tried to file this at 9:01 p.m. from, let's say, California. But I think this guy was in a different place. I don't know if he was in
But he was in a different time zone, right?
Yeah, and anyway, yeah. So the tax court received it after midnight, and they rejected the petition, and they said they don't have jurisdiction.
Wow.
So the timeliness is of the essence.
That's
So we
harsh.
got off a little bit off track, but I think this was important information.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So how do taxpayers appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals? So as you mentioned, you file a notice of appeal within 90 days, and then you appeal to the circuit where the taxpayer lives, and review is de novo on legal issues, which we've mentioned.
On legal issues, yeah. So the appeal court is looking at it not on the factual basis, but they're looking at the legal issues. If there was some issue that the U.S. tax court did not, rule on that appropriately, that's what they'll look for.
Yeah.
At this time, we're talking about the appeals process. So how do taxpayers appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals? And I think you just finished the slide.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So what happens during the review process? So the appeal court upholds factual findings unless they are clearly erroneous. But they mainly focus on the legal interpretations, like I said, of the U.S. tax court judge.
Right. So can decisions be further appealed? So if dissatisfied with the Court of Appeals decision, parties can seek review by the U.S. Supreme Court. However, the Supreme Court has discretionary jurisdiction and rarely reviews tax cases, as Mr. Chani already mentioned.
Yes.
Should I take this one?
Yeah. So because you're continuing on, so yeah, what happens if they also should know, the participants, what remanding to the tax court is? So yeah, please go ahead.
So what happens if the appeal is successful? So if the appellate court reverses the tax court's decision, the case may be sent back to the tax court for further proceedings. These proceedings will be conducted in line with the appellate court's ruling.
So in fact, why don't you finish it up, Zach? Because there are a few
Sure.
slides left.
Yeah. So what is the difference between the regular tax court procedure and the small tax case procedure? So the U.S. tax court offers two types of procedures for resolving tax or disputes, rather. So the regular tax court procedure and the small tax procedure. And in the next slide, or the next few slides, we will talk about the differences between them. So to start off, let's talk about the regular tax court procedure. So this is the standard procedure used for more complex tax disputes involving larger amounts of money. And there is no monetary limit on the amount of tax deficiency in dispute. The process is it's a formal process, and the rules of evidence and procedures are more strictly applied. Taxpayers who go through the regular tax court procedure have the right to appeal the tax court's decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals. And lastly, taxpayers often hire an attorney to represent them due to the complexity of the proceedings. So now let's talk about the small tax case procedure. So this is also called S procedure. So this is designed for less complex cases, and this procedure is more informal and faster. It is available for disputes involving $50,000 or less for any one tax year or period. And the rules of evidence and procedure are relaxed, making it easier for taxpayers to represent themselves without needing an attorney. Decisions made under the small tax case procedure are final and cannot be appealed, and the process is generally quicker and less expensive, making it a good option for taxpayers with smaller, straightforward disputes. So what advice would you give to taxpayers who are considering litigation against the IRS but are unsure if the U.S. tax court is the right venue for them? So for taxpayers considering litigation with the IRS and evaluating whether the U.S. tax court is the right choice, here are some key points to consider. So the U.S. tax court is ideal for disputes over tax deficiencies, typically involving a notice of deficiency. For other types of disputes, such as refund claims, the U.S. District Court or the U.S. Court of Federal Claims may be more suitable. So you just need to assess your case type. Next, you should determine case complexity. So for complex cases with large amounts of intricate tax issues, the regular tax court procedure may be appropriate, whereas for smaller disputes involving $50,000 or less, the small tax case procedure may offer a quicker and more cost-effective solution. And then consider appeal options. The tax court allows litigation without paying the disputed amount of front. However, decisions in small tax cases cannot be appealed. So if appeal rights are important to you, this is an essential factor to consider. Consult a professional. Excuse me. Speak with a tax professional or attorney specializing in tax litigation to better understand your options and determine if tax court is the right venue for your case. Thinking about timing. Tax court proceedings can be time consuming. If you need a faster resolution, small claims procedures in tax court or settling directly with the IRS may be better options. And lastly, evaluate formality. The regular tax court procedure is formal and follows strict evidence rules. If you prefer a less formal process and want to represent yourself, maybe you don't plan on hiring an attorney, the small tax case procedure may be more comfortable. So that's all for today. Thank you very much for everybody who joined. And again, since our services are free, donations are crucial for our support and expanding our reach. Monetary donations are greatly appreciated. And additionally, those who can volunteer their time, expertise, or help spread awareness are a great help. So if you had any questions about anything during the presentation, please don't hesitate to email us at info@taxpayershelpcenter.com, and your questions will be addressed by a tax professional. So with that being said, thank you all for listening, and thank you, Mr. Chotani, and have a great day.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you so much for everyone who showed up today for this very informative session.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.